Welcome back to my garden. Over the past few weeks, I've been talking about the topic of play, discovering the inner child within us and unleashing the creative potential that might be stifled by a more serious worldview, adult worldview. But this week, I'd like to branch into what would be more positive psychology territory. And I think play has something to offer there too. This line of thought has partly been stimulated by, as is so often the case, a couple of the bits of electronic fluff that I receive in my inbox. The first was the latest film by Struthless, a graphic designer, filmmaker, animator, writer, vlogger, very interesting chap from Australia. And he was speaking about limiting beliefs. In his particular case, it was a belief that he wouldn't perform well on stage based on a childhood experience. Perhaps I'll attach a link to his film. It's an interesting one, and I think well worth your time. I say perhaps because I might say I will, but then again I might forget when it comes around to posting this film. Never mind. Limiting beliefs. So the idea that we have kind of a story that we tell ourselves that protects us, serves a purpose in terms of saving us from the worst possible happenings based on bitter experience in the future. So there we are, limiting beliefs. And allied to that, something that is frankly quite different. I receive a weekly newsletter from Newport, the writer of Deep Work and So Good They Can't Ignore You, Digital Minimalism, and also a computer scientist professor at Georgetown University. Very interesting thinker and writer, and someone who's very much in favor of really going, well, I said deep work, and that's what he's all about, going in deeply into topics rather than being distracted by superficial fluff or the kind of distractions that sabotage the possibility of our producing truly our best effort, work, contribution. And he's explored this idea over a couple of emails lately. First, talking about the fantasy writer Brandon Sanderson, who apparently has constructed an enormous underground lair where he writes. And this week he followed it up with a story about Bram Stoker, who apparently went off to some wilderness coastline spot in Scotland and immersed himself in the environment, his sort of physical representation of Transylvania. And what have these two things got to do with each other? I mean, it's clear, perhaps clearish. The two Newport's ideas, the the writing lair and going on a sort of to an inspirational spot to write your book, that kind of makes sense. What has that got to do with the limiting beliefs? Well, I think in both cases, what is going on is a sort of version of play. The one where it's very clear what we mean by the play. You kind of, as Cal Newport describes it, method act your way, method write your way to your book. You immerse yourself in an environment, or you create an environment around you that is conducive to your finest work. James Clear talks about this kind of importance as environment in his book Atomic Habits. But what about the limiting beliefs idea? Well, I didn't really flesh that out. But once again, touching on James Clear, one sort of route out of the nightmare of the limiting belief is to think of all of your actions as being positive votes in terms of the person that you want to become. And so, for example, you might think that you're someone who is incapable of performing in public. And a first stage to overcoming that is to ask yourself, examine deeply whether that's really true, whether that is in fact something based on evidence or a sort of just a story that you're telling yourself based on something that happened a long, long time ago and no longer applies. And if it's the latter, to start looking for examples that run counter to that and provide evidence for the fact that far from being someone who can't perform in public, you're someone who can. And if you take that to a more extreme sort of level, it could be that you start pretending to be that person. Let us imagine you are someone who just doesn't have the discipline or the habit. You haven't found it within you to commit to this sort of a serious writing habit. Well, pretend that you are. Play a little game. Imagine that you are a writer. Imagine what that writer would do, how they would behave, create a little story in your mind, and play at being a writer. Just as children would play at being doctors and nurses, mums and dads. I know I've fallen into horrific gender stereotypes, and if that bothers you, just bear in mind that it was a male nurse and a female doctor and a stay-at-home dad and a working mother or whatever. I mean, I think we can, as much as there's a need to take these matters seriously, you know what I mean, and I don't think there's any cause at this point in the video for the political correctness police to run wild. And I don't think they do. And I suspect no one has. But I just thought I'd throw it in because it's somewhat topical. There we are. Bit of a distraction. In fact, I've distracted myself to the point that I can't remember what I was talking about. Yes, I can. So imagine for a moment that you are a writer. Pretend that you're a writer. Give yourself 15 minutes when you play a writer and perhaps talk to yourself in the third person as aforementioned writer. Create a character. And if you actually think about it, that is what children are doing. When they are role playing, they're not doing it just for entertainment purposes. They are doing it as a very subtle and serious way of learning, I suppose, adult forms of behaviour. They're also having fun. They're also entertaining themselves. But I think they're doing it for growth, learning, evolutionary reasons. And if kids do it, well, why shouldn't we? I am not a great filmmaker, but strangely, having now produced hundreds, literally, of these short-form YouTube videos, I've sort of become a filmmaker by default, just by playing the game enough. Just fake it till you make it, I believe is the expression. And I don't like that expression because it's sort of built into it as a negativity. You're faking it till you make... Well, the moment you say that, you are reinforcing the idea that you are not that thing. Whereas if you say, I'm going to play a little game, it doesn't matter, it's entertainment purposes, and it'll be fun. In a way, you've lowered the stakes, but you've enabled yourself to perform at a higher level. You can get carried away, as people do when they play, or when they improvise, sort of a dramatic kind of way. And tying in, circling back to Cal Newport's, the story that he told about Bram Stoker, this kind of method writing, immersing yourself in the character, and then simply, I suppose, writing a journal, being that person and writing that journal. Well, why not in non-fiction or in some other area? Why not indeed? Give it a try. I think I'm going to. And I'll let you know how it turns out, whenever that might be, because this may be a game that I play for a long time. Well, that's it. As always, let me know what you think in the comments below. I must admit I didn't overthink this video. I watched the Struthless clip and read the Cal Newport newsletter, I suppose an hour ago, and the thought came to me and I decided I'm not even going to put on a fancy shirt. I'm just going to make this film. I'm going to pretend I'm someone who acts on impulse and is decisive in their performance. And so I did. So let me know what you think. Pretend you're someone who replies to all the emails. And until next week, from a sunny Brazil, trust you're having a wonderful life. Ciao.